All right, sir. We are live and welcome to episode number 20 of Epic Thursdays. It's an honor to be here again on the first episode of the year, and I've got a great guest. I guess we'll talk about what Jeffrey's accomplishments are. And we were just discussing before we went live that we need 300 minutes versus 30 minutes to kind of do justice to all the work that Jeffrey has done and continues to do. But again, for a reminder for those who are tuning in first time for watching our show, Epic Thursdays is all about those things that help you get in that state of optimal performance. In 30 minutes, we distill the insights, the ideas, the knowledge that can help you get into that optimal state of high performance. But connect with people across the world, movers and shakers, as far as longevity is concerned, as far as health and wellness is concerned. And today, our guest, all the way from San Francisco, and I'm extremely grateful that he's up for a 7 a.m. call. His time, it's 7 p.m. here in Dubai. But Jeffrey Wu, the founder of Human HUMN, and yeah, I guess he's an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he's a biohacker, he's an inventor as well. He's got patents on his name. He's got maybe a lot more accomplishments, but I guess that's a sort of slow start into this. But again, welcome, Jeffrey, to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today with us.
Hey, a pleasure to be here. I know we had some scheduling with different time zones and travel, but we're making it happen and super excited to speak with you.
Wonderful. So Jeffrey, I think it would be maybe just to ease the audience, because we've got people that watch in, from Dubai, they watch from the US, they watch from even Australia as well, and Asia. So I'd love to maybe kind of begin by spend the first few minutes talking about the company HUMN, which stands for Health via Modern Nutrition. What was the genesis? What got you into this? Because you earned a degree in computer science from Stanford, and what led you to kind of figure out, let's do this thing in nutrition versus doing something in engineering?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I grew up in I think I would say like the heyday of Silicon Valley. I remember when I was a student, only the craziest super nerds were the computer science majors, and then right during when I was an upperclassman, the Social Network movie dropped, and everyone wanted to be computer science, and everyone wanted to do startups. So I saw that transition from computer science being for hardcore people only to now it's like the biggest major, and everyone wants to be a tech billionaire. For me personally, I went down that path, started a company that was in mobile apps, actually sold that company to a company called Groupon back in 2013, which gave me a little bit of resources and time fairly young in my career to think about kind of broader problems or interesting problems I wanted to solve. And one fact that, or one observation that struck me was that all my smartest friends in the computer science program were building algorithms to have people click more ads or, grab attention. Obviously that's a little bit of a tongue in cheek, but I mean, people were essentially making computers better, right? People were focused on making AI, machine learning techniques better for robots. And I was looking at statistical trends of humans. Most of us are becoming diabetic. Most of us are becoming obese, and lifespan actually reduced in America, at least for the last couple of years. So I thought, hey, what if we applied more of our engineering systems thinking training towards optimizing human performance? And that's been a central part of my interest research career for the last almost 7 years now.
Wonderful. So, I mean, as you began doing this work, what did you find in the way people were approaching it? Just like you mentioned, people were about, focus on the clicks, the ads and everything else. When you went into this world of nutrition and health, what did you find was the prevailing sort of paradigms in terms of, whether it was supplements, whether it was like just general guidance? What was not happening that you felt was a niche or an area that you probably can help and serve other people with?
Yeah, I think the most abstract or just the broadest lens to think about this space is that biohacking to me is the decentralization of healthcare, the decentralization of medical knowledge. And I mean it in the same terminology where cryptocurrency is a decentralization of financial instruments and really the internet. I mean, this conversation is really a decentralization of communication and information, right? Like without the internet, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation with, your lovely audience watching and tuning in. So I think the previous model for medicine or health data was very authoritarian, where you would have very much a master-mentee relationship with your doctor, where the doctor would have all the healthcare knowledge, research, literature, and the patient would just have to say, copy that. I'm going to listen to what exactly you tell me. And I think as information of medical published data, as well as the access to tools have become commodities, have become ubiquitous, you and I can read the same PubMed research papers that are being published out of Harvard, Stanford, Cambridge, just like every single doctor. And in fact, you probably have more time to actually read those papers. I've become friends with so many medical doctors and clinicians, and they're all good people, but oftentimes a large portion of their day is being a technician on a human body, just like the car shop is like a technician on an automobile. They're not necessarily now like the Tesla engineer coming up with the next understanding the internal combustion engine and the trade-offs with electric engines. So I think it's just like really unpacking the disciplines of what medicine and what physiology is, and then realizing that those tools and accessibility is available for everyone from the knowledge perspective. And now with devices, implantable monitors, all of those things are converging where the relationship is now much more of a coach guide. Let's have a discussion about like the thing that all of us care about the most, which is our health, right? You have no health, you have nothing. So I like this trend, this direction where we are all becoming much more responsible of our own performance, our own health, our own longevity.
Now you chose, and that's a nice say, because you've chosen to focus in a specific area, a lot of your research, whether it's on the ketone side, calorie restriction. So again, for someone who has no clue on what we're talking about when you speak of, keto diets or ketosis, how would you kind of give a simple primer on that?
Yeah. So the keto diet, the ketogenic diet, it's been somewhat popularized because you hear certain celebrities talk about losing a lot of weight on a keto diet, right? So that's oftentimes the common point where people enter the keto diet into their life, weight loss. But for me, it's actually a pretty different route. So I was studying paths to extend longevity, right? And one of the most consistent methods to extend longevity, and it's constrained from, it holds across humans all the way to C. elegans and mice and everything in between, is calorie restriction or fasting. And that was an interesting point because it seems very counterintuitive, almost like you're starving, but you live longer when you starve. And that counterintuitive insight got me really excited about this particular area of metabolism of nutritional biochemistry. So when you fast or when you do a ketogenic diet, essentially what that is that you restrict carbohydrates. So you have very, very low carbohydrates, which means you eat moderate protein and higher amounts of fat. And that forces your body, because carbohydrates or glucose or sugar is an important fuel for the brain. You need basically a replacement energy source to capture the energy deficit from the lack of sugar. Our bodies evolved a physiology called ketosis, where it converts your fat stores into what are called ketone bodies. And these are molecules like D-beta hydroxybutyrate that do cross the blood-brain barrier and actually very, very efficient fuels for the brain and muscle. So essentially, through our evolutionary history, we would be very brittle, weak animals if we constantly had to find glucose to eat. But and that's the beauty of our species being relatively robust, is that okay, we need an alternate backup energy store, and that's where ketosis and ketones come into play.
And so I guess if the link between ketosis and longevity was like, I guess an interesting segue for your research versus the typical sort of fad diet based phenomenon that I guess is the front pages of the newspapers.
Yeah.
You've written papers on this. You've actually, I think, got something even recently published as well that I believe is we're talking about. What is kind of more of the recent science behind this? Like, is more of it good? Where do you kind of start? And if you've started, where do you kind of take that to optimize your performance? Because I think what I'm interested in as well, when I've been kind of, doing ketosis, as you're an athlete, as you said, whether you're in the military, for instance, or you're kind of someone who's got to perform under extreme conditions, what could you do to help you get to that state in a reliable I guess, on-demand manner versus kind of waiting for it to kind of emerge because, suddenly the sun has shone this way versus the other way. So again, let's think of the performance elements of this and help me understand in your work, because you've been working with a lot of, I guess, scientists and, people in the military, you work with corporate people. How has the knowledge of the work that you've done helped them become far more, not just effective, but also, at that state where they're feeling more alive and energetic?
Yeah. So I think when a lot of people enter a ketogenic diet for the first time or feel in ketosis for the first time, they feel kind of a cognitive buzz or a clarity that is not quite like a stimulant rush like caffeine. It's not like Adderall. That it's like some weird combination of being both relaxed and stimulated at the same time. And that's, I think, where a lot of people, at least on the biohacker performance side, really like being in ketosis. And again, this is not because they're looking to lose weight. This is because they're trying to tap into a more efficient physiology or metabolism. So where people like to apply ketosis is one, cognitive performance, and then two, endurance performance. And then three, there's emerging data showing and suggesting that it's actually a good state to be in for recovery. And actually the paper that you referenced was actually published in a top physiology journal, Frontiers in Physiology. The paper is titled the Ketones in Post-Exercise Recovery Applications and Mechanisms, where we describe the literature and sort of the molecular pathways of why being in a state of ketosis after exercise actually steps up and improves your recovery rate. So those would be like the three reasons why people would even contemplate going into ketosis: cognitive, improving aerobic endurance performance, and then enhancing recovery.
If you said the recovery sounds counterintuitive on the face of it, right? Because obviously you're in that state where you're starving of fuel, or I guess the sugar and everything else, and you are wanting to get back to kind of get that energy. And what's the mechanism there that helps someone say, recovery wise, this is a better state to recover in versus the typical, let me have an energy bar, for example, and take that, or let me have sort of a, electrolytes drink, for instance, etc.
Yep. Yeah, great question. So one thing that's important to note about the ketogenic diet and actually being calorically deficit or starving is that the ketogenic diet is fully replete on calories, right? So if you're eating 2,000 or 3,000 calories a day normally, and maybe 1,000 calories of that is from carbohydrate, you take away, so let's say 3,000, so keep the numbers consistent. So 3,000 calories a day is what you require. You eat, the standard diet. Okay, one third protein, one third carbs, one third fat. The point of a ketogenic diet is not to say, hey, only eat protein and fat, so you only eat 2,000 calories a day. It's actually replace that carbohydrate calories from things like fat. And I think this is where it gets nuanced, because you got to be thoughtful what type of fat, right? And I think a lot of cardiovascular heart doctors might be kind of freaked out. Oh, wow, you're telling people to eat a lot of fat. And I think that is definitely an interesting can of worms that we can talk about. Yes, so you're not doing lower calories overall. You're getting all the substrate you need. It's just a different ratio of the macronutrients, right? The macronutrients of fat, protein, carbohydrate. And then that's what HVMN, Health via Modern Nutrition, is a pioneer in. We're actually looking at making synthetic ketones, exogenous ketones, where you can consume directly as in a beverage form. And that is essentially like a new macronutrient category, because what is a macronutrient? Macros are things that essentially have calories that fuel the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle. I know we talked about like breaking down the terms. So if you remember from biology, high school or college biology, all of our cells have a power plant called the mitochondria. And that's the organelle, or the part of the cell that takes like a fat molecule, a sugar molecule, or a ketone molecule, and oxygen, and turns into ATP. And ketones happen to be the most efficient starting material for producing ATP, which is really advantageous, again, for performance, recovery, and longevity. So that's where it's important to know that we're not looking to do a calorie deficit for recovery. But the interesting thing is when you actually have the tool of exogenous ketones, when you have high ketones, high carbs, and high protein at the exact same time, which is like not normally possible in normal physiology, that's where you see super enhanced recovery. But a good point. But even if you're on a normal ketogenic diet, people report lower inflammation because ketones are anti-inflammatory through the NRLP3 inflammasome pathway. Um, and just from an evolutionary physiology perspective, ketones are anti-catabolic, meaning they're good at preventing muscle tissue breakdown. So a couple of those signaling effects of ketones in your system seem to be showing out in actual data, both anecdote and emerging literature done in randomized control trials, or at least control trials.
And when you look at people who are getting to that state of high performance, like Ironman, for example, athletes, right? They kind of, and I think you're the beverage you referred to. I've not had the pleasure of trying it yet because I'm trying to figure out how to get beverage sometime from the US here because I'm not traveling to the US nowadays because of all the travel things.
We'll figure it out.
But I understand from everyone I've heard who has taken it that it doesn't taste like your lemon squash. It has a very strong taste, but at the same time it kind of works magic and gets you into that your numbers, your actual scores for being in ketosis state are reached in hours versus much longer. I mean, tell us a bit about the ester drink, I guess.
Yeah. So ketone esters or different exogenous ketones, basically this space is it's actually not a super new space. People have been looking at creating synthetic ketones for a long time. It's just been super expensive or people didn't know why you would need it or it tastes like crazy. So yes, you're exactly right. It tastes super bitter, super astringent. I've heard people call it like fish poop to jet fuel to gasoline to poison, right? I've heard it's a lot of fun descriptors of that taste. So why is it so interesting? Why is it so powerful from a performance perspective? Well, it's essentially allowing your body or the human to directly eat ketones. So now you don't have to go through a fasting period or a ketogenic diet to convert your existing fat into ketones. You're essentially eating ketones in its like raw form in a bioavailable way. And that's essentially having three paint colors on your paintbrush, and now you have a fourth one. It's like, oh wow, you can like literally have a new dimension to explore in your nutritional program. So when you actually do a finger stick and test your blood, you actually look like you've been fasting for 7 days in like 30 minutes. Like you will see your blood go from 0.2 millimole ketone, right, 0.1, 0.2, very nominal ketone levels, to 2.0, arbitrarily high, which is like a super fun demo to do because you're like, again, if you've never done finger sticks before, it's like, okay, these numbers kind of moved around, but try like fasting for a day. Like you get to like 0.5, 0.7 after like 2 days, right? Like it's a very, very hard to actually elevate your ketones because for most of us who don't do fasting or ketogenic diet, you never actually get the metabolic flexibility to produce ketones that quickly.
Yeah, you're right.
It's hard
exactly.
to like elevate your ketone level. So when you have a drink that like blasts your ketones to the moon in like 30 minutes or an hour, it's like, whoa. You see the number, you're like, wow, that's cool. But you also just like feel like a keto rush, which is I think the fun part of the experience.
And yeah, and you're right about the effort. I mean, I've tried, not being on a keto diet and fasting, like a dry fast, and the highest I think I got to was 0.9.
Yeah. How long were you fasting for?
16 hours,
yeah.
Probably. So yeah, like completely dry fast, like, as we do over here during the month of Ramadan, for instance. And like, so 0.9 got, and like, okay, hold on, I thought would have gone higher, right? But it didn't. So like, as you rightly said, like, you could do the best you can, but ultimately it's not going to, get you to that sort of super state of 2 or something else without some external intervention, so to say.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the cool lever, right? Like, I think for me, it's like an interesting research tool, right? I think to me, it's an interesting science research innovation, but and I think part of the company side is like, okay, how do we productize that research lever into useful consumer products, right? And I think that's where there's going to be so much innovation, excitement over this year and in the coming years, where we really figure out, okay, is this best used as a sports drink or a longevity tonic or whatnot? And I think that this is just a start, because again, if we have like a fourth macronutrient, there's so many ways you can like combine them with the existing three macronutrients for something interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes that fourth category, and you've got fat, protein, carbs, and you've got these now, the fourth
Yep,
category. Uh,
exactly.
so a couple more things, because you are in the Bay Area, and I think it'd be worth understanding, in the world of biohacking that you guys are surrounded by, and of course, being a biohacker yourself, what's new and emerging that perhaps, I guess we can have a sneak preview of that would be worth leveraging, especially in these COVID times, perhaps help us, stay more healthy, stay more focused, stay in that state of, high immunity. I mean, what's happening that is worth knowing?
Yeah, a couple things that I think are interesting that friends are working on are just better sensors around our body, right? So I've been playing around with continuous glucose monitors for the last 4 or 5 years, and I have a group of friends with a company called Levels that is really democratizing access to these CGMs. I don't know, what the jurisdiction is in Dubai, but I know that in the EU, that's more off the shelf, so it's easier for you to get. And I think it goes back to one of the original points I had, which is that I see this entire movement as a decentralization of healthcare, right? Like, why do you need a doctor to allow you to understand your blood sugar response to certain foods? And we already know that diabetes or high blood sugar is a high comorbid factor for serious presentations of COVID. Right. And again, I think what some of the popular confusion amongst my community in the nutrition and biohacker space is that, okay, yes, we talk about lockdowns and social distancing, but no one talks about like, hey, be more metabolically healthy. If you're not obese and not diabetic, like and have high vitamin D status, your chances of dying are literally like 10x, if not larger magnitude than someone who has all three of those comorbidities. That's not opinion. That's just a post facto review of the data. So maybe it's, people are like, hey, you can't tell people to like change their lifestyle. Like, that's not what we do. But it's okay to say, hey, shut down your businesses and change how you can interact with humans. So to me, it's I'm not the policymaker. I'm a private person that has some sense making and some engineering training to look at the policy and the data and be like, hey, we seem very, very emphasized on one aspect of pandemic mitigation, which I think is fine, right? Like, yeah, don't go to like an indoor club and like breathe on everyone. But I think just in terms of like getting some of your metabolic stats right through a CGM, seem like very, very sensible. Again, very, very cheap interventions to do. Say, hey, get outside a little bit, exercise a little bit, reduce eating your sugar bombs a little bit. I don't know why our public health officials don't talk about nutrition and lifestyle. And then I think sleep will be more and more sophisticated. I have a friend, Mateo, who has a company called 8 Sleep that's doing really, really cool sensors in your mattress with also temperature control. And it's cool to see all of, and I think these are just, again, two small examples of the increased data that our bodies generate and being returned to us in a useful form. So my sense is that just like there's so much data of our digital lives that are being like piped and repurposed and used and probably to more pernicious effects of like trying to control our brain. Hopefully the data that our bodies generate just by living and having side effects of going through this type of metabolism or this type of exercise, we can actually pipe that data back to us in a useful way, right? Like, I don't want to see a dystopic world where like the man or the government uses all of our biological data against us. I want to see us as individuals owning that data so we can make better informed decisions over our lifestyles. So that's perhaps a little bit nuanced point when I think people talk about, oh, there's so much data being generated by our bodies and people are like messing around with it. We should be careful that yes, there is a potential downside, but there's a downside to every technology. Let's just be good policymakers, product makers, and good customers or users of the services to demand reasonable policies. But I'm just generally like a technology optimist here, maybe a technology realist in the sense that like you're not going to shove this back into Pandora's box, right? Like you're not saying, oh, internet shut down. You know, it's open, it's gone. We got to figure out how to best live with it.
So I guess no discussion about COVID in the month of January 2021 will be complete without discussing vaccines. So maybe we can spend a couple of minutes in your thoughts on, of course, there are different types of vaccine, inactivated virus, mRNA, et cetera, all that. So I'm kind of wondering, in the world of the biohacking space, because I see people who are at one end saying, conspiracy theory should not take it. They're injecting all those chemicals into our body, which are typically found in vaccines, versus those who are saying it's better than not having it. I mean, what's your take on it as Jeffrey?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to overstep my lane here in terms of talking about vaccines and mRNA virus.
But from a biohacker's perspective, vaccine, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to do that disclaimer just to say that, hey, this is like just basically my personal thoughts here. So I think vaccines are good. I think people should use them if they are available. So that's like sentence one. I think I can understand some of the concern. And again, I'm very open-minded, love to have a conversation that yes, like the timelines seemed quite rushed in the beginning because like this is like the shortest timeline from going from concept to in vivo on humans ever, right? And with emergency, it's probably a sensible risk trade-off. But I think just given how many doses have been out there, definitely the short-term effects seem like safe, right? It's like, yeah, there always are edge cases, but like enough samples, enough doses are out in the short term. Yes, there's always a question. Yes, no one has had this vaccine in their body for 30 years. Maybe everyone turns into like a green alien in 30 years off of this vaccine. I think that risk is quite mitigated, just understanding, how these things seem to work, right? If you're just mimicking a spike protein of the coronavirus, that doesn't seem to have a lot of potential to have too many other crazy side effects if it works as planned. So to me, I think these questions are hard because you're running extrapolations on limited data sets, right? Like no one can say, hey, I have 10,000 humans that have had this vaccine for 30 years and it's safe. They don't have that data. No one has that data, but that's expected, right? Because we're trying to solve the problem now. And I think we have to make the best risk reward adjustment here. So that's where I net out. It's like, yes, I think there are legitimate fine critiques. But I think it's kind of this weird conversation because I think there's like nuanced critiques that I think are sensible. And then there's just like, I'm an anti-vaxxer and like F vaccines. Like I just don't want anyone to inject microchips into me. And it's like, I am not like, I think that is pretty conspiracy theory. Like I see no evidence of that. It'd be pretty interesting, amazing to have like nanobots rolling into my bloodstream that Bill Gates can control me with if I inject this. If that technology exists, that would be dope. But it's just like that's so far out of like just rationality that it's science fiction. So to me, it's like like I intend to get the vaccine once it's available to me. Obviously, different jurisdictions have different rollout plans. But am I like deathly scared of the coronavirus? No, I mean, I think before we've gone on, I've been able to do some safe traveling and meet outdoors. I try to follow the local jurisdictions, right? So wherever part of the country that has the rules, I follow the rules. And certain states are a little bit more liberal and open than other states. Like you heard in San Francisco, it's pretty locked down, although they're starting to reopen up again because I think people are just realizing the risk reward is a hard calculation. And I think part of it is that this policy, no one is a master of all of it, right? I think you can talk about some public health officials, but I think even they're overwhelmed. They do not understand small business. They do not understand economics. They do not understand virology. They do not understand like all the second order effects of any single intervention. So I think it's just a hard challenge. And then you have like a feckless politician who's like scared of their approval ratings being like do that one, right? It's just like, and at least in America, it's very, very scattered approach.
Yeah. I mean, we're blessed here, at least in Dubai, in the UAE, second highest GDP per, I guess population, or rather vaccines per on a per thousand basis, just after Israel. So doing pretty good at vaccinating the entire population as much as possible to whoever obviously would want it on a voluntary basis. So Jeff, maybe just finishing off, and like I imagine, 30 minutes have flown by as if we just spoke for 3 minutes. But as a closing, I guess, parting thoughts, what would you suggest for those who'd like to stay in their healthiest, primest state and serve their families, serve themselves, serve their mission if they're having a business, serve the community? What should they do from a biohacker's perspective in terms of maybe 3 to 5 key tips that probably will kind of help them stay in their best selves?
Awesome. Yeah. So I think one thing to consider, and I think just from the the Ramadan practice, I mean, essentially fasting or some time restriction on eating is beyond Ramadan. There's almost every single major culture religion has some sort of fasting incorporated into their culture. Mm-hmm. So I think having some sensible eating windows is like a very, very easy place to start, because one, we didn't talk about insulin and that whole can of worms, but we're in a modern nutrition environment where it's so easy to be like the problem of today's health is not famine, right? Famine was the biggest killer of humans in 1800s and before. We solved that problem through industrialized food, which is great. Basically no one's dying of famine in the sense of like lack of calories. If people are dying of starvation, it's just like we have crap policy where like we can't give people like the bag of rice that like we have a ton of, right? Like the famine today is like bad distribution or whatever, some third world, like they just can't afford the food. So, but by means and large, like the actual famine is solved, but now the problem is overconsumption. And I think fasting is a great way to deal with this modern nutrition environment. So point one. Point two, and this is actually interesting, and correct me if I'm overstating. I've a lot of friends from your region of the world, and apparently the diabetes rates are pretty high in the Middle East. And I just like kind of looking at the food, oftentimes a lot of sugar embedded into like the coffee and this and that, and it's like, hey, if you're thinking like 30 grams, like a brick of sugar with like every drink, that's causing a lot of those pre-diabetes diabetic conditions. And again, as we just referenced, diabetes is one of the biggest comorbidity factors of COVID. And why? Because you have, higher inflammation. And then when COVID, there's a bigger cytokine response and your body shuts down with the over response of your immune system. So second point two would be, hey, let's try to reduce refined sugar intake, right? I'm not saying everyone needs to be keto. I think that's, like, I'm not always keto because like sometimes carbs are awesome. And like, that's part of like the joy of life and the variety of life. But for sensible, like easy ways to reduce refined carbs, right? Like you don't need to add like 5 spoons or like 5 pumps of simple syrup in your coffee. Like avoid like the sugar soda drinks. Don't eat candy bars, right? Like maybe have a sweet dessert every now and then, but like really have that as a treat rather than like the staple. Point 3 is, like, I think one thing that's been helpful for me, especially as a lot of us are still in quarantine, like embed your exercise throughout your day. So I have like a fun challenge with a bunch of tech CEO friends who are doing 500 push-ups a day, which is like a decent amount of push-ups.
500 push-ups, that's a bit of a marathon.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot if you do it like all in one go, but if you spread it out over 12, 16 hours, you do like 100. Like after this conversation, I'll probably do 100 or 200 push-ups, and then go into my work day, and then I think it's basically like my main point is that it's very easy to be sedentary right now. It's not always practical to say, hey, I'm going to block out an hour arbitrarily in the day to go exercise. Like there's no gyms really, but just having like weights around, doing some band exercises, push-ups, like air squats, be more consistently ancestral to how we evolved as animals, right? Like it is very unnatural for us to be sitting on our butt looking at a screen, even though like all of us are doing that right now, right? Like we are not designed to be in a box, right? Like we're basically modern caged zoo animals of humans. And I think that was an interesting insight, which is that, okay, the tiger in the zoo looks pretty damn depressed, right? Like the dolphin in the aquarium looks pretty damn depressed. And if, you know, if the alien comes down, you see a bunch of humans in their little boxes, like, man, these humans look pretty depressed. So I think I use that insight to try to structure my life a little bit where it's like, yeah, you know, try to like imagine what our ancestors were doing when they're running around and foraging and having, you know, the tribal community, those conversations, and try to mimic that or embed that as much as possible into our everyday life. So those are, I think, 3 super actionable, like easy, low hanging fruit. And then if folks who really want to get more into ketogenic diet, all of that, obviously my company at Healthy Amana Nutrition, we have really great products that support a more low carbohydrate lifestyle. So those would be like just really great ways and, you know, to kind of get oriented and get started.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, you've kind of, I guess, hit the nail on the head. I think the last one is a brilliant example, right? That we have an excuse that because the gyms are closed or we can't move out as much, that you need that 1 hour block. But, you know, there have been industries that have become online. Like, I mean, I do martial arts, for instance, right? And in the past, the Japanese senseis would never have done any session online. They would have asked you to come to the dojo. I've got now the world's most highest ranked instructors doing online training from Tokyo, right? And that they're doing it because they recognize that they can't train with their fellow students in the gym, in the dojo. So they've got to do it. So I think if you have that intent on being active and, you know, mobile, like you said, you can find a mechanism. You can split the session, as you said, you know, do the 500 push-ups across the day, break up your 1 hour, do 15-minute sort of sessions, break it up as well. It's possible. It's all about having the right intent and making sure that you're ready to kind of realize that that's an important part of your staying in the right sort of position, health-wise and mentally as well, of course.
100%.
All right. So I guess we'll finish off by saying we always have our guests set a challenge for our audience, whoever, when they watch it, whenever they watch it now, they watch it 3 weeks later, that, okay, this is the guest challenge, which is like either a week challenge or, excuse me, or a month challenge. So in your, I guess from Jeffrey Wu's side, what challenge would you set the audience or the viewers right now that they could kind of undertake should they, I guess, will, want to do to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, usually I would challenge on some sort of fasting or having a tighter eating window. But since I'm just in the middle of a 500 push-ups a day challenge, I'm gonna just push it out to folks. So if you watch in the morning, 500, I know sounds like it is a lot. It is a lot of push-ups. So I'll say you can do 100 push-ups today. So I think it's like, if you listen to it, whenever you listen to it, just do 100 push-ups a day. I think for a lot of people, that's the most push-ups they've ever even thought about. But just break it up. Like even if it's like 1 push-up and then take a break, you can do 100 push-ups in a day. And I think when you realize that, hey, our bodies can do a little bit more if we just actually space it out, be thoughtful about it, I think that'd be pretty cool. So my challenge is that when you see this interview, this conversation, let's do 100 push-ups that day and break it out as long as you need to break it out. Even if it's 1 push-up and then take 10 seconds or 20 seconds, a minute break, you can do 100. I guarantee it.
All right. Well, we are going to take it on. I'll start with that tomorrow morning. It's a bit late right now, but we'll go for it and kind of update the viewers in the comments. But again, Jeffrey, this has been super, super knowledgeable and insightful. Thank you very much for your brilliant insights from the world of Silicon Valley as well. You've been kind of, with the investor world, with the sort of science world as well. So it's kind of, frankly, a privilege to have someone who's got the best of both perspectives, the practical, nuanced element, but also actually the deep insights that come from being in the field. So wonderful. Thank you for your time. I realize it's getting a bit more saner in terms of time right now with the sun coming out. I can see a bit of a bright light behind you.
Light, yeah.
So again, thank you for being with us, and look forward to kind of seeing how HUMN grows in the next phase of its, I guess, history. Thank you very much.
Honor's mine. We'll talk soon.
And everyone, thanks for watching, and hope to see you in our next episode next week. All the best.